Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. James 1:22.
You know, when most people think about the book of James, they kind of picture it as a collection of wise sayings, sort of like the Proverbs of the New Testament. But honestly, that's not the whole story. What if I told you it's actually a fiery, urgent letter, written by one of the most important figures in the early church to a community that was in a serious crisis? Okay, let's get into this. The letter kicks off with this incredibly simple yet powerful introduction. James, a servant. That's it. No fancy titles, no big claims to fame. And that simplicity, well, that's what makes it so powerful. It pretty much implies that the author has so much authority, he doesn't need any other introduction. And that, right there, raises a huge question.
I mean, with a name as common as James, or Jacob in the original Greek, who could possibly write with that kind of confidence, needing zero introduction? This is the central mystery we're going to unravel here, the identity of the man behind this massively influential letter.
And that brings us to the first part of our story, because the man we're talking about, he wasn't just any leader. His journey from being a total skeptic to becoming a pillar of the faith is one of the most incredible transformations in the entire New Testament.
So, which James was it? Well, scholars in early church tradition are pretty much in overwhelming agreement on this one. This letter was written by the one man who needed absolutely no other introduction, James, the brother of Jesus Christ himself. That unique relationship gave him an authority that was just self-evident to everyone in the early church.
What's so wild is the dramatic arc of his life. I mean, during Jesus' ministry, James was a skeptic. His own family thought Jesus was kind of out of his mind. But then, the resurrection happened. The Apostle Paul tells us the risen Jesus made a special appearance just to James, and that moment changed everything. He went from non-believer to a core leader, a pillar, as Paul called him, guiding the church through its most critical early decisions. And eventually, he was martyred for that very same faith in AD 62.
And this detail just says it all about his devotion. His commitment to justice was so well known, even by people who weren't Christians, that they called him James the Just. But he had another nickname too. Camel knees. Yep, you heard that right. Early historians tell us that James spent so much time on his knees praying for his people that his knees became calloused and tough, just like a camel's. Wow.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly devout leader. But who was he writing to? Because to really, truly understand his message, you first have to understand the world his audience was living in. And let me tell you, it was a world on fire. He addresses the letter to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, which is also known as the diaspora. Now, these weren't just people living abroad. These were Jewish Christians, refugees who had been driven from their homes in Jerusalem because of persecution. They were exiles, just trying to survive in a pretty hostile world. And what a world it was. I mean, just imagine what they were facing. They were dealing with crushing taxes from Rome, being exploited by the wealthy elite who owned all the land. And get this, even having their daily wages withheld by their employers. The class divide was massive, and all of this was just fueling this rising tide of revolutionary anger against Rome that was about to explode.
James writes directly into this pressure cooker of a situation. But he's not trying to start a riot. No, instead he offers something truly radical, an alternative to both violent revolution and just giving up in despair. He's charting a third way, a path of active, enduring faith.
And that brings us right to the core of his letter. His message wasn't some abstract theology. It was an urgent, practical guide for survival. It was a theology for a faith that actually works in the real world. This slide really gets to the heart of it. See, James saw a community that was tempted to think that just hearing the right things or believing the right doctrines was enough. And he pushes back hard. He argues that a passive belief is totally useless. True faith, he says, has to be active. It's not enough to just hear the word. You have to go out and do the word. And that's where he drops his famous line, "Faith without works is dead." So what does this active faith actually look like? Well, James gets incredibly practical. He says, control your anger, be quick to listen, and slow to speak. Demolish social barriers, show absolutely no favoritism to the rich, actively care for the most vulnerable people in your society, and for them, that was orphans and widows, and, maybe most importantly, tame your tongue, because your words have the power to build worlds or burn them to the ground.
And here's a fascinating little detail. A lot of scholars believe James wrote this letter in the mid-40s AD.
Now, if that's true, it would make it the earliest book written in the entire New Testament. Think about that. It gives us this unparalleled glimpse into Christianity before it had spread widely outside of the Jewish world.
So, this ancient letter, born out of a very specific crisis, carries a challenge that feels just as relevant and just as piercing today as it did 2,000 years ago.
James just lays it on the line. He asks this direct question, and man, it echoes through the centuries. What good is it if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? It's a question that's really designed to make us all stop and think.
Ultimately, the power of this letter is its flat-out refusal to let faith remain some abstract idea. It demands that our belief becomes tangible. It has to be visible in our actions, in how we treat the poor, in the words we choose to speak, and in our pursuit of justice. It just has to be more than something we hold in our heads.
And so, that leaves us with this final, provocative question. We live in a world that is still torn apart by so many of the exact same issues James was talking about: inequality, angry words, injustice. So the question he put to his first readers, he now puts to us. In this world right now, what does your faith that works actually look like?